There's one country in world football that shouldn't exist the way it exists. A country that produced more all-time great candidates per capita than almost any other nation on the planet. A country that took a British schoolyard game and turned it into a national religion. A country that gave its own style of playing a name, La Nuestra, ours, before most of the world even knew you could dribble past a defender. And still, for almost 30 straight years, this same country walked into every major final it reached and walked out with silver medals, choked tears, and the same question tattooed on its back. Why us? Why always us? We're talking about Argentina. And over the next 40-something minutes, you're going to see something that almost nobody puts in one place. How the same nation strong enough to give the world Di Stéfano, Maradona, and Messi somehow spent decades losing 7 consecutive major finals before finally cracking the code in Qatar. Now maybe you're mostly a European football fan, and you're wondering why you should sit down for a South American story. Fair question. Here's the honest answer. If you want to understand why superstars alone don't win trophies, why federations can quietly sabotage entire generations, and why one interim coach that a national hero publicly said couldn't even direct traffic ended up rebuilding a dynasty, you don't want to miss this one. Because Argentina isn't a case study. It's the case study. And this channel combed through every final, every scandal, every dressing room mutiny to bring you the version that actually holds together. You're getting the payoff early. Within the first 10 minutes, we're already inside the room where a golden generation went on strike against their own federation and set the entire country back by decades. Later on, we're going to walk you through the exact moment the so-called Argentina curse broke. And no, it wasn't a Messi goal. It was smaller than that. And somehow it was bigger too. Stick around for it. Here's the thing though. If you're watching this right now, you're watching it at a very specific moment in history. Argentina is the reigning World Cup holder. The reigning Copa America holder, back to back to back at the top of the mountain. And history says dynasties in this sport don't last very long. So the real question isn't how they got there. That's the story of this video. The real question is whether what's coming next looks like domination, or like the beginning of another 28-year hangover. You want to hear the answer to that one before the next World Cup cycle actually starts. This one is for the football romantic, for the tactics nerd, for the fan who's ever screamed at a screen because his team keeps producing generational talent and still can't lift a trophy. If any of that is you, you're already in the right place. So take a breath. Because to tell this story properly, we can't start in Doha. We can't start with Messi lifting the trophy. We can't even start with Maradona in Mexico. We have to start in a Buenos Aires cricket club in 1867. Because if there's one thing this video is going to prove, and yes, prove, not claim, it's this. Argentina's football history isn't a straight line of glory. It's not a fairy tale. It's not even really a curse. It's a civil war fought over more than a century and a half between the country's talent and the country's chaos. And every single time you think one side has finally won, the other one shows up right there in the mirror. The talent built the myth. The chaos wrote the story. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why almost no team in the world can lift a trophy the way Argentina lifts a trophy, because almost no team in the world has been through what Argentina had to go through to get there. Let's rewind. June 20th, 1867. The Buenos Aires Cricket Club, a colonial little green square built by British immigrants who missed home, hosts what most historians agree was the first proper football match ever played on Argentine soil. The players are almost entirely British. Nobody in the stands calls it football. Nobody in the country really understands what they're watching. And yet, from that afternoon on, something starts to grow in the port cities of Argentina that would end up shaping every single thing that came next. 26 years later, in 1893, a Scottish schoolteacher by the name of Alexander Watson Hutton formalizes the whole thing. He builds a league. He builds an English language school where the game is baked directly into the curriculum. And he does it so effectively that more than a century later, Argentina is still producing players like Alexis Mac Allister, grandchildren of that exact British to Argentine cultural bridge. Football stops being a game for visitors and starts becoming something else entirely. It becomes a way of moving between social classes. A way of turning immigrants from Italy, Spain, Germany, Poland, and the British Isles into Argentines. A way of building a national identity out of a country that, at the turn of a century, was basically a collection of ports full of strangers who didn't share a language yet. And then the style shows up. Argentina gives its football a name, La Nuestra, ours. Creativity over power. Flair over structure. The dribble as the highest form of expression. Playing pretty as a moral principle, not a tactical choice. Now here's the part almost nobody tells you. On paper, Argentina should have dominated South America from day one. It was massive. It had leagues, clubs, schools, and formal competitions before most of its neighbors even had national federations. It had money. It had ports. It had a culture obsessed with the sport before most of the continent could name a starting 11. And yet, in 1916, Argentina hosts the very first South American championship, the tournament the world now calls Copa America. For teams, Uruguay, Chile, Brazil, and Argentina. And on their own turf, the hosts finish second. Uruguay wins it. Then Uruguay wins the second one. Then Brazil wins the third. Then Uruguay wins the fourth. Argentina finally lifts a trophy on their fifth attempt in 1921, 5 years after they started organizing the entire competition. Let that sit for a second. It took Argentina 5 tries to win a trophy in a tournament that had 4 teams in it. 4. And it doesn't stop there. In 1928, Argentina reaches the final of the Olympics, at the time, the biggest international football tournament on earth. They lose 2-1 to Uruguay. In 1930, Argentina reaches the final of the very first FIFA World Cup ever played. They lose 4-2 to Uruguay. Uruguay, a country 16 times smaller than Argentina. A country whose entire population wouldn't fill Buenos Aires by itself. And it's Uruguay, not Argentina, that walks off with 2 Olympic gold medals and 2 World Cups before Argentina lifts a single one. Brazil up north adds 3 World Cups of its own, while the Argentines are still trying to figure out how to close a final. There's a name for this feeling in football. The world calls it a silver medal country. A nation that's always in the room, always in the final photo, always one step short of the podium's top step. From the very beginning, Argentina fits that description almost too perfectly. Everyone respected them. Everyone feared their players. Nobody actually watched them lift the biggest trophies. And here's the wild part. As bad as that was, it was about to get significantly worse. Because in 1948, Argentina was about to make a decision that would gut its entire football culture from the inside, hand its greatest player of all time to a foreign country, and knock the national team out of 2 consecutive World Cups without a single ball being kicked. Everything you're about to hear in the next few minutes changed the direction of Argentine football for decades. And most of it happened not on a pitch, but in a boardroom. Buenos Aires. In a room full of club directors and lawyers, one of the most talented footballing generations the world had ever seen puts down its pens, walks away from the table, and says something no player in South America had really ever said out loud before. We're worth more than this. The newly formed Players' Union hits the Argentine FA with 3 demands. Kill the wage cap. Set a real minimum wage. Give players the freedom to actually negotiate their own contracts. Basic labor rights, in other words. The kind of rights that today feel like the bare minimum in any professional sport on earth. In 1948, in Argentina, this landed like a bomb. The club said no, so the players went on strike. Historians have called what followed the most serious industrial dispute in the entire history of world football. Not one of the most serious. The most serious. Full stop. The whole thing dragged on for 5 straight months. Attendances at league matches collapsed by 87%. Not 87% down from the peak, 87% down on the average gate. Stadiums that used to shake at kickoff had rows and rows of empty wooden seats. The Argentine game, the game that gave the world la nuestra, was suddenly playing to no one. But here's the part that stings the most, and it's the part the Argentine FA does not put on any of its official posters. The strike didn't end because the players won. It ended because they got outsmarted. Only 86 of the 342 professional footballers in the league were actually earning the maximum wage. That means more than 250 of them were living on scraps, playing top-flight football and still going home to families that were counting every peso before the end of the month. So the club directors did the coldest, cleanest thing they could have done. They stopped negotiating with the union as a group. They started making side offers to the lower-paid players one by one. A little more money, a little more security, a promise that they'd never be blacklisted, and they picked the union apart from the bottom up. The stars held the line. The rank and file couldn't afford to. So the strike broke, quietly, one signature at a time. And here's the price Argentina paid for that victory. The country pulled out of the 1950 World Cup, and then it pulled out of the 1954 World Cup. 2 full editions of the biggest football tournament on the planet, Years of what should have been the golden window for that generation, thrown into a bin because the federation could not figure out how to pay its own players fairly. 2 World Cups. Gone. Not lost on the pitch. Simply not attended. Real quick, if you're locked into this story so far, do the channel a favor and tap that like button. It costs you nothing, and it's the single fastest way to push videos like this one in front of other people who genuinely care about how the game got where it is today. Alright, back to it. Because the wage strike didn't just cost Argentina 2 World Cups. It cost them their best players, too. When the domestic league became unlivable, entire dressing rooms started looking abroad. Some went to Europe. Some went to Mexico. But the biggest exodus of all, the one that would haunt Argentina for the next 50 years, went to a place almost nobody on the continent was watching yet. Colombia. At the time, Colombian club football was living through what history now calls El Dorado. A short window where the local league went rogue, refused to recognize FIFA transfer rules, and started throwing money at every unhappy South American star that would board a plane. And Argentina, in the middle of its own labor collapse, was the perfect market to raid. Dozens of players took the offer. But one of them didn't just take an offer. He rewrote his entire international identity. A skinny, cold-eyed forward from Buenos Aires. A striker so complete that Europe would eventually stop him mid-career and quietly redraw the rules of what a center forward was supposed to look like. His name was Alfredo Di Stéfano. And what Argentina did to him next, or more accurately, what Argentina let get done to him next, is one of the most bitter own goals any football federation has ever scored on itself. Because by the time this story is over, Di Stéfano will hold up 8 league titles, 5 European Cups in a row, and an award so exclusive that only one human being in football history has ever received it. None of it for Argentina. Let's talk about how that happened. Once Alfredo Di Stéfano landed in Bogotá, he did what unhappy players do all over the world when they finally get out from under a bad federation. He kept playing. He played well. And in 1951, he pulled on the Colombian national team shirt 4 times, in 4 exhibition matches, and honestly probably didn't think about it more than twice on the plane ride home. Except FIFA thought about it. A lot. Those 4 friendlies were enough for FIFA to rule that Di Stéfano was now ineligible to represent Argentina in official competition. Never mind that he had already lifted a Copa America in the light blue and white. Never mind that Colombia's federation was, at that exact moment, not even fully recognized by FIFA for those matches. Rules are rules, and conveniently they were being enforced against a country whose federation had been treating its own players as replaceable parts for years. So there he was, considered by many of the coaches who had seen him play the best forward on planet Earth. Ineligible for Argentina. Not a citizen of Colombia. Nationless in football terms. A trophy waiting for a country to claim him. Real Madrid claimed him. There's a whole novel to be written about that transfer alone. Barcelona thought they had him. Madrid maneuvered. Contracts got signed twice, over each other in different cities. In the end, in 1953, Di Stéfano boarded a flight to Spain, and the version of him that walked off that plane was the one every football historian remembers. Within 3 years, he wasn't just great. He was, in the words of most people who watched him at the Bernabeu, the best footballer alive. Then came the maneuver that made Argentine fans want to punch walls for the next 50 years. Di Stéfano gets a Spanish passport in 1956. Immediately, Spain files to have him cleared for their national team. FIFA at first says no. Spain pushes. The Spanish Federation, backed by the political weight of Real Madrid itself, one of the most powerful institutions in the entire country during the Franco era, pushes harder. FIFA folds. The ban is quietly reversed. Di Stéfano puts on the red shirt of Spain, and he goes on to do the following for a country that did not raise him and did not develop him. 8 La Liga titles, 5 European Cups in a row, 2 Ballons d'Or, and the Super Ballon d'Or, an award that only exists once, given to the best player on earth across a 30-year window from 1959 to 1989. One human being in football history has ever received that trophy. His name is Alfredo Di Stéfano, and he collected it in a country that had to naturalize him to get him on the pitch. Argentina, meanwhile, was in freefall. Not just because of Di Stéfano, because his story wasn't unique. It was just the loudest example of a pattern. A generation of Argentine talent was being scattered across 3 continents, and the domestic game was left with the leftovers. And in 1958, the leftovers had to show up to a World Cup. Sweden 1958. Argentina's first World Cup in 24 years. 2 decades of tactical stagnation, of losing your best players to strikes and exile, of playing the same beautiful little dribbling game, while Europe quietly turned itself into a laboratory of speed, pressing, and long ball transitions. Argentina walked into that tournament thinking they were still the standard. Match 1. West Germany, 3-1 Argentina. Match 2. Northern Ireland, 3-1 Argentina. Match 3. Czechoslovakia, 6-1 Argentina. To this day, that Czechoslovakia scoreline stands as the worst single result in Argentina's entire World Cup history. In Argentina, the tournament earned its own permanent nickname, El Desastre de Suecia, the Sweden disaster, and the players who lived it never really let go of it. One of the Argentine forwards later admitted, in one of the most brutally honest lines any professional footballer has ever offered, that the team did not even know what the tempo was supposed to feel like. The passes came in on a teammate's chest at speeds they had never trained for. They said out loud that they looked like turtles. The homecoming was worse than the tournament. 10,000 people showed up at the Buenos Aires airport, not to celebrate the return of the national team. To meet them with insults, coins hurled at their heads, eggs cracked against the terminal windows, and one word repeated over and over. Traitors. That word matters, because it tells you exactly how Argentine football culture handled failure at that stage of its history. Not with reflection, not with rebuilding, with rage. And that rage was about to become a pattern that would repeat itself in almost identical form for the next 60 years. Because if you thought Sweden was the low point, wait until you meet the referee at the 1966 World Cup. Wembley, quarterfinal of the World Cup. Argentina against the hosts England. 35 minutes into the match, a West German referee by the name of Rudolf Kreitlein, a man who does not speak a word of Spanish, sends off Argentina's captain, Antonio Rattín, for dissent. Rattín, of course, does not speak a word of German. 2 grown men stand in the middle of Wembley, arguing across a language barrier in front of 90,000 people in one of the most important tournaments in the world. The exchange goes on for several unforgettable minutes before Rattín finally walks. England wins 1-0. But the moment that actually poisoned this rivalry for a full generation didn't happen on the pitch. It happened at the final whistle. As the Argentine defender Alberto Gonzalez tries to swap shirts with England's George Cohen, the oldest ritual football has a small gesture of respect between opponents. England's manager Alf Ramsey physically walks over and rips the shirt out of Cohen's hand. Then, in front of the cameras, Ramsey tells the world exactly what he thinks of the Argentine team. Animals. That single word ripples across South America, like a slap. Not just Argentina, the entire continent takes it personally. For decades afterwards, Latin American fans point to that word as the exact moment English football stopped being respected and started being resented. Argentina, meanwhile, fails to even qualify for the 1970 World Cup. The free fall keeps going, and that is where a chain-smoking 36-year-old from Rosario finally walks into the story. His name is Cesar Luis Menotti. His nickname is El Flaco, the Thin One. He's a young manager at a club called Huracan, and he happens to be coaching, at that exact moment, the prettiest football anyone in Argentina has seen in years. He also happens to have opinions about the game that would make any modern press conference explode. He calls his philosophy left-wing football. He says football styles are political. He says football that is generous, that entertains the public, that plays for the fan and not for the trophy, is the only football that has any moral value. The FA hires him anyway, because Argentina has just been awarded the hosting rights for the 1978 World Cup, the first World Cup they've ever gotten a hold on their own soil, and for the first time in the country's history, the national team is officially the #1 priority of the entire federation. Everything else can wait. And then, in 1976, the country stops being a country. A military coup, led by General Jorge Rafael Videla, overthrows the sitting president. What replaces her isn't a government. It's a machine. Torture centers open. Journalists disappear. Scholars disappear. Ordinary citizens are pulled off streets and never seen again. The dictatorship that takes power in that coup will not release its grip until 1983, and during those 7 years, tens of thousands of people are murdered by the state. One of the largest detention and torture centers of the regime is set up about 1 kilometer from the Monumental Stadium, a 7-minute walk. And the Monumental, of course, is the venue where the 1978 World Cup final is scheduled to be played. The regime pours money into that tournament like a country running from its own mirror. The Argentine Secretary of the Treasury of the day openly estimates the cost at around $700 million, in a country that could not afford it in a decade where every peso was accounted for. And what they were buying, in exchange, was the oldest trick in the authoritarian playbook. A clean image, a modern Argentina, a unified Argentina, sports washing at its purest. Human rights groups all over the world call for a boycott. The calls reach FIFA President João Havelange directly. Nobody withdraws. The tournament goes ahead exactly as planned. Then comes the sporting decision that Argentine fans will argue about at kitchen tables for the next 40 years. Menotti leaves a 17-year-old kid off the squad. A kid who, in that same season, had already scored 26 league goals in 35 games. A kid the entire country knew was already one of the best players on earth. Diego Armando Maradona was not going to his first World Cup. Menotti's public reason was age, was pressure, was the risk of putting a boy in front of that kind of machine. His private reasons, some say, had political fingerprints all over them. Either way, Argentina walked into the 1978 World Cup without the best young player of its generation, in a tournament run by a military regime, and somehow they still had to play their way through it. And the way they played their way through it is where the story stops being a football story and becomes something a lot darker. Argentina and Brazil enter the second round of the 1978 World Cup dead level on points. Brazil is ahead on goal difference. Only the winner of the group goes to the final. And in the final round of matches, the math is impossibly clean. Argentina, playing after Brazil finishes, needs to beat Peru by at least 4 goals. They beat Peru 6-0. Almost 50 years later, that match is still one of the most argued about 90 minutes in the history of the World Cup. Peru come out of the tunnel actually looking dangerous. They create the first 2 chances of the game. And then, somewhere around the 20th minute, the entire Peruvian performance simply switches off. The ball never comes back into Argentina's half in any meaningful way. Every duel goes to the hosts. Every 50-50 is theirs. Now here's what has actually been reported. In the days leading up to the match, the Argentine government reportedly shipped 35,000 tons of grain to Peru. The Central Bank of Argentina reportedly released around $50 million in frozen Peruvian assets. And in the moments just before kickoff, General Videla, the head of the dictatorship, walked into the Peruvian dressing room in person, which on its own would be an extraordinary breach of protocol. What makes it more extraordinary is that he wasn't alone. He was accompanied on camera by former United States Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Was there a fix? Nothing has ever been proven in a court. Some Peruvian players, including one of their best midfielders, have publicly said in later interviews that they were pressured by their own federation to accept a loss. Others in that Peru dressing room have denied it just as firmly. Menotti has always denied that anything happened. What every historian agrees on is this. In one of the most politically charged tournaments in the sport's history, one of the most convenient scorelines in the sport's history showed up at exactly the right moment. Argentina walked into their second-ever World Cup final. Their opponent was the Netherlands, the same Dutch side that had lost the 1974 final. And they were arriving without Johan Cruyff. For decades afterwards, the world assumed Cruyff had boycotted the tournament for political reasons. It would take Cruyff himself, in 2008, to finally reveal what actually happened. Months before the tournament, he had been the target of a kidnap attempt in his own apartment in Barcelona. His wife had been tied up. His children had been in the next room. A rifle had been pointed at his head. And he decided quietly that he was not going to travel across the world with that image still sitting behind his eyes. The Netherlands played that final without him. Argentina beat them 3-1 in extra time. Mario Kempes, top scorer of the tournament with 6 goals and the winner of the Golden Ball, sealed the win. Argentina became the second South American country ever to lift the World Cup on home soil. And on paper, in a book of scores and dates, the drought was over. But the story is not the score. The story is that a military regime handed a trophy to a football team while political prisoners were being tortured in a building a 7-minute walk away. And that image, the trophy in one frame, the detention center in the other, is why, to this day, the 1978 World Cup sits inside Argentine football history with an asterisk that not even Menotti's most loyal defenders have been able to erase. For years later, Argentina walked into the 1982 World Cup in Spain as defending champions. This time, they had the 17-year-old they had left out in 1978. This time, they had Maradona. What they did not have was peace of mind. Because the tournament began in the middle of the Falklands War, a conflict between Argentina and the United Kingdom over a set of islands in the South Atlantic that Argentina calls Las Malvinas. Argentine teenagers were dying in that war while the national team was preparing to play a World Cup group stage in Barcelona. Team captain Daniel Passarella would later say the players were in no emotional state to be at that tournament at all. He said he regretted playing. Argentina crashed out in the second round. Nothing about it felt like the reign of a champion. For years later, though, the story completely changed. Because in 1986, the football world was about to meet what most people, to this day, still call the single greatest individual World Cup performance any human being has ever put on a pitch. And it started with a quarterfinal. Against England. Argentina walked into the quarterfinal against England carrying something the world was not prepared to see on a football pitch. Grief. The Falklands War had ended less than 4 years earlier. Boys who had been in school with these players were dead in the South Atlantic. And Maradona later would put words to it in his own memoir, words that make it very hard to watch the tape of that match the same way ever again. He said, in effect, that somewhere in his head, he and his teammates had decided to blame the English players for everything that had been done to their country. For the dead kids. For the survivors. For the flag. He knew, he wrote, that it sounded crazy. He said the feeling was stronger than they were. That is the emotional temperature of the man who then produced the most iconic 4 minutes in the history of the World Cup. 51st minute. A ball drifts into the England penalty area. Diego Armando Maradona, 5 feet 5 inches tall, goes up for it against England's 6-foot goalkeeper Peter Shilton. Somehow, impossibly, Maradona wins the header. Except he doesn't. Slow the tape down and you see the fist. You see it clearly. You see Shilton pointing at his own knuckles the moment the ball crosses the line, screaming at the referee. And the referee, either because he doesn't see it or because he doesn't want to, gives the goal. Argentina 1-0. Later that night, Maradona would tell a room full of journalists that the goal had been scored a little bit by the head of Maradona and a little bit by the hand of God. And the phrase would outlive everyone in that room. 54th minute. Maradona picks up the ball in his own half. 60 meters from the England goal. Every English fan watching in a pub in London probably exhaled. This is fine. This is where we want him. As far from our net as physically possible. 11 seconds later, it's 2-0. No passes. No teammates. 5 England players beaten one after the other on a run that the human brain has trouble believing even when it's watching the footage. 16 years later, that goal would be voted the greatest World Cup goal of the entire 20th century, and honestly, nothing scored since has really challenged it. England pulled one back late. Argentina won 2-1. And at the end of that game, an English midfielder called Steve Hodge did the smartest thing any journeyman footballer has ever done in his life. He asked Diego Maradona to swap shirts with him. Maradona said yes. 36 years later, in 2022, that shirt was sold at auction for around £7.1 million, briefly making it the most expensive piece of sports memorabilia of all time. Steve Hodge, folks, absolute legend of a swap. Belgium fell in the semi-finals. And then, in the final, came West Germany. And even against the most disciplined, most organized team on the planet, Maradona was still the man setting up the winner. Argentina lifted the World Cup, and Maradona lifted himself out of great player territory and into somewhere else entirely. Look at the raw numbers of that tournament for a second. Maradona attempted or created more than half of Argentina's total shots. He attempted more than 90 dribbles, 3 times more than any other player at the tournament. He was fouled 53 times across 7 matches, which is a number that sounds fake until you look it up. And when you count the goals he either scored himself or directly assisted, you get to 10 out of Argentina's 14 goals across the entire competition. 10 out of 14. By the time the trophy came out of his hands, the debate wasn't whether he was the best player in the world. The debate was whether he was the best player who had ever lived. And in Argentina, that debate was pretty much closed. Quick pause. If this is the kind of deep dive you actually enjoy, hit the subscribe button while you're here. The Argentina story doesn't end at Maradona lifting a trophy, and honestly, the next stretch is somehow even more insane than what you just heard. Subscribing means you'll actually catch the next chapter of stories like this one when we drop them. Alright, because here's the thing about being the greatest player who ever lived. History does not let you keep that title in peace. Argentina was suddenly a nation with 2 World Cups, a legitimate claim to be the best national team culture on earth, and a talisman who was rapidly becoming a global icon. The country was walking taller than at any point in its footballing history. And what came next is the pattern this video has been warning you about since the very first minute. The exact same country, the exact same talent pool, the exact same national obsession. 28 straight years without a single major trophy. 28 years of losing finals. 28 years of watching one man carry a country while his federation fell apart around him. 28 years of a word that Argentine fans would come to whisper before every knockout tie, half joking and half terrified. The curse. Let's talk about how they got there. Italy, the World Cup final. Argentina against West Germany again. The rematch of the 1986 final. A chance for Diego Armando Maradona, now the biggest star on the planet, to lift the trophy back-to-back. Germany won. Argentina 0. Round 2 to the Germans. And unfortunately for anyone who hoped the highlight reel would at least be spectacular, it wasn't. That match is remembered by most of the football historians who have written about it as one of the lowest quality finals ever contested. Full stop. Time-wasting, cynical fouls, a tempo somewhere between funereal and paralyzed. Argentina walked off with silver, and to be honest, not a lot of neutrals felt sad about it. Then something surprising happened. Argentina actually started winning again. Just not at the World Cup. The 1991 Copa America. Argentina wins it. Their first continental title since 1959. That is a 32-year gap, in case you missed it. 2 years later, they win it again. Copa America 1993. A young Gabriel Batistuta, a name every football fan of that era remembers with religious respect, is the top scorer of the 1991 edition with 6 goals. Argentina walks off with a second Continental Cup in 3 years, and the country lets itself believe, for a moment, that the golden decade is not over yet. 2 things about those 2 tournaments, though. First, they weren't the World Cup. Second, and much more painful, Maradona was not on the pitch for either of them. In 1991, he was serving a 15-month ban after one of the most public drug scandals of any athlete alive. In 1993, he was tangled up in fitness issues, form issues, club problems, and all of the personal demons that his final decade would eventually make impossible to ignore. So Argentina had lifted 3 major trophies in 7 years, 2 Copas, and the '86 World Cup, plus a losing final in 1990. On paper, still one of the best national team resumes on the planet. But under the surface, they were doing the exact thing every great football culture eventually does when it stops looking at the mirror. They started thinking they were untouchable. And in football, arrogance is the one weapon your opponents don't even have to buy. You hand it to them. And the country that Argentina was about to hand it to had spent an entire generation waiting for that gift. Colombia. By the early 1990s, Colombia had their own golden generation coming together. Valderrama, Higuita, Asprilla. A team so stylistically outrageous that some tactics writers still argue their 1993 side was one of the most entertaining international teams ever assembled. And on the final match day of the World Cup 1994 qualifiers, Colombia and Argentina played each other in Buenos Aires. Argentina needed a result to win the group cleanly. Colombia 5, Argentina 0. At home, in the capital. The next morning, Argentina's biggest sports magazine went to press with a black cover. Just the scoreline printed on it. And underneath, in giant yellow lettering, a single word. Vergüenza. Shame. A Colombian journalist named Mauricio Silva Guzman would later write an entire book about that match, and he would frame it in a way that Argentine fans have never really wanted to hear, but have never really been able to argue with either. He wrote that Colombia had won that game on behalf of every South American country that had for decades been made to swallow the arrogance of Argentina. That is not my interpretation. That is what he wrote. Argentina scraped into the 1994 World Cup through an intercontinental playoff against Australia. They won it by the finest of margins. An own goal was enough to save them from complete humiliation. And when they finally got to the United States for the tournament itself, they came in wounded, uncertain, dependent as ever on the shoulders of a Diego Maradona who was by that point physically wrecked. He never made it out of the group stage. A failed drug test at USA 94 ended his international career on camera, in real time. Some of you have probably seen the footage of him being led off the pitch by a nurse holding his hand. If you've never seen it, don't watch it hoping for closure. It doesn't give you any. And that in one single afternoon was the end of an era. The problem is that in football, an era ending is never really an ending. It's a doorway. And the doorway that opened after 1994 for Argentina led into somewhere very dark, very long, and depending on how superstitious you're willing to get, completely inexplicable. 28 years, 7 major finals, 0 trophies, losing so consistently and to the same rivals over and over again that eventually the country stopped calling it bad luck and started calling it something else. Some people said arrogance. Some people said bad management. A lot of Argentine fans, and I'm not exaggerating here, started to say it out loud. Cursed. Between 1993 and 2021, Argentina played in 7 major tournament finals. 7. They lost every single one of them. For most countries in world football, 7 major finals across a generation would be a golden era to build monuments around. For Argentina, it became a punchline. Denmark took them out in a Confederations Cup final. Brazil took them out 3 separate times across different competitions. Germany added their name to the list. And then, for the finishing blow, Chile beat them in back-to-back Copa America finals in 2015 and 2016. Argentina lost more major finals in one generation than most countries in the world have qualified World Cups. Now here's the part that made every single loss more insulting than the last. Argentina was, at that exact moment, one of the most productive youth football pipelines on the planet. Between 1995 and 2007, FIFA staged 7 under-20 World Cups. Argentina won 5 of them. To this day, no country in the world has won more under-20 World Cups than Argentina. 6 total, back-to-back in 2005 and 2007. The best player in the 2005 edition was named Lionel Messi. The best player in the 2007 edition was named Sergio Aguero. And that was just the top layer of a pipeline that was churning out generational talent almost every single year. They had the players. They had the coaches. They had the fans. They kept losing anyway. The 3 that hurt the most all came in the same 3-year window. 2014 World Cup final in Brazil, in the Maracanã, against Germany. 1 goal in extra time, Argentina lose 1-0. 2015 Copa America final against Chile, in Santiago. Penalties. Chile wins. 2016 Copa America Centenario final against Chile, in New Jersey. Penalties. Chile wins again. That entire Chilean team, Alexis Sanchez, Arturo Vidal, Eduardo Vargas, Claudio Bravo, deserved every second of that back-to-back run. But from the Argentine side, it did not feel like a story about Chile's greatness. It felt like a country falling into an open hole 3 times in a row while yelling the same warning at itself. And this is where we need to be honest about a name. Gonzalo Higuaín. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. Higuaín did miss enormous chances in those finals. The kind of chances that end debates. The kind of chances that, if you close your eyes as an Argentine fan, still haunt you. But football is a team sport. Messi himself missed a penalty in that 2016 final. Higuaín also scored a lot of the goals that got Argentina to those finals in the first place. And on top of all of that, you had a federation, the AFA, that was, at that exact same moment, imploding so completely that even the most gifted players on earth couldn't outrun it. Here's the flavor of what imploding meant. Julio Grondona had been the president of the AFA for 35 years, a monarchy in a sport that pretends it doesn't have monarchs. Whatever you thought of him, he was the glue. And in July of 2014, he died. Within a year, the system collapsed. The 2015 presidential election of the Federation featured 75 eligible voters. When the ballots were counted, the final total was 38 votes to 38 votes. 76 votes. From 75 voters. Yeah, that number. Just sit with it for a second. Allegations of bribery and ballot stuffing came in from both sides. The acting president got hit with fraud charges within a year. FIFA had to step in personally and install a normalization committee to run Argentine football by proxy. Players went months without being paid. Maradona publicly called the leadership a mafia. The president of the country, not the federation, publicly called the AFA corrupt. And in the middle of all of it, the biggest name in the sport, standing on a podium in a Copa America final with tears in his eyes, said something that basically no other star of his stature had ever said out loud. He said, "This is not for me anymore." He said, "I tried." He said, "For finals, and I can't win." He said, "It hurts me more than it hurts anyone, but it's clear this isn't for me." Lionel Messi retired from the Argentina national team. He would come back. Of course, he would come back. But by the time the 2018 World Cup arrived, the situation was almost cartoonish. Argentina cycled through 4 coaches in 4 years. The biggest names in world management, Diego Simeone, Mauricio Pochettino, publicly said no thank you. And even the ones who eventually said yes, the AFA could barely afford to pay. Argentina walked into Russia 2018 with one of the oldest squads in the tournament, a fractured dressing room, and a manager who seemed to have exactly one tactical instruction: give it to Messi and hope. They went out in the round of 16, and the country basically hit rock bottom. Now watch what happened next. Because the man who was about to become the answer to all of this, nobody wanted him. Not the fans, not the press, not even the greatest player his country had ever produced. He didn't even have a name in most Argentine kitchens. His name was Lionel Scaloni. Let's set the table on Lionel Scaloni for a second, because if you didn't grow up watching Argentine football, this appointment probably makes no sense at all. Scaloni is a former Argentina international. He was in the Deportivo La Coruña squad that won La Liga in 2000, the last time Depayer ever won it, and he was in the under-20 Argentina side that lifted a Youth World Cup in 1997. Solid career. Not a legend. As a coach, before he got the senior national team job, he had never, and I mean never, been the head coach of a senior professional football team. Not once. Anywhere in the world. In his entire life. His first job as a senior head coach was Argentina. Now, put that image next to what Diego Maradona said about the appointment, in public, on national television. Maradona said more or less, Scaloni is a nice guy, but he can't even direct traffic. He said, how are we handing the Argentina national team to Scaloni? Are we crazy? He said if he wants to go to a World Cup, sure, but the Motorcycle World Cup, not the football one. That is a paraphrase, but not by much. And that is the guy that the greatest player Argentina ever produced was publicly telling everyone was the wrong hire. Scaloni's response later on was one of the most emotionally intelligent things you'll hear from any modern coach. He said the comments didn't hurt him. He said, at that moment, that kind of criticism was completely normal. He said, I hadn't coached anywhere yet. I had no experience. And Diego, being Diego, wasn't going to hold back. Scaloni said he wasn't going to argue that Maradona was right, but he wasn't going to argue he was out of line either. Read that answer twice. That is the voice of a man who is not going to be pushed out of his job by noise. The first thing Scaloni did was cheat in the best possible way. He surrounded himself with people the players already loved. Pablo Aimar as his assistant, the player who, when Messi was a kid in Rosario, was Messi's actual idol. Roberto Ayala, Walter Samuel, ex-internationals who had lived every one of the wounds this dressing room had accumulated over the past 2 decades. He built a staff that carried the pain the current players couldn't put into words. Then he rebuilt the squad. Not around Messi, but for Messi. He got Ángel Di Maria back to the spotlight without stapling the flag to him. He installed Rodrigo de Paul in midfield as the engine and informally as Messi's on-pitch bodyguard. He added Leandro Paredes and Giovanni Lo Celso. He committed to Lautaro Martínez up front and to Marcos Acuña and Nicolas Tagliafico on the flanks. And then he made 2 calls that are the entire reason we're recording this video. Christian Romero at the back. Emiliano Martínez in goal. Romero, aggressive, decisive, borderline unhinged in the exact way you want a center back to be. Martínez, though, that one is a story. At 28 years old, this man had exactly 0 caps for the Argentine national team. 0. He had spent nearly a decade as a backup goalkeeper at Arsenal. Nobody had trusted him to be a starter through his entire career. And I would love to tell you that Scaloni saw something in him nobody else did, but the truth is a little colder than that. Scaloni's undisputed number 1 was Franco Armani. Just before the 2021 Copa America, Armani caught COVID. So Emiliano Martínez went in because there was nobody else, and the country held its breath. By the way, the 2021 Copa America itself had already been through hell just to happen. It had been postponed from 2020 because of the pandemic. Argentina had been picked as co-hosts with Colombia, and both countries then lost their hosting rights, Argentina to a COVID surge and Colombia to political unrest. 13 days before kickoff, CONMEBOL had to hand the tournament to Brazil. Argentina were going to have to try to end their 28-year drought by winning the trophy inside their biggest rival's living room. DePaul later talked about the mood at the start of it. He said, honestly, at first there was mistrust in us, in the coaching staff. He said the build-up wasn't clean. So Scaloni did something a lot of Argentine fans were not emotionally prepared for. He stopped trying to make Argentina play like the Argentina of the highlight reels. He made them play pragmatic, compact, low-turnover football. Score early, protect the lead, don't die on principle. In 7 matches across that tournament, Argentina held the majority of possession in exactly 1 game. They scored more than 1 goal in only 2 of them. And any football purist watching from the outside was writing think pieces about how boring it was, right up until the moment Argentina walked into the Maracanã for the final. Brazil. Home. Legendary stadium. The rivalry of rivalries. Angel Di Maria. Delicate chip over the goalkeeper. 1-0. There is a phrase Argentine fans had been half whispering, half praying for years. Anulo Mufa. Cancel the jinx. In the Maracanã, at the final whistle, they finally got to say it out loud. And now the man who couldn't even direct traffic had a World Cup to plan. Argentina walked into the 2022 World Cup on a 36-match unbeaten run. 36. They were the runaway favorites to lift the trophy. The bookies had them. The pundits had them. Half of neutral fans were quietly hoping for a Messi ending on the biggest possible stage. All they had to do was navigate a group with Mexico, Poland, and Saudi Arabia. Match 1, day 1, kickoff. Saudi Arabia 2. Argentina 1. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was a robbery or a fluke, because it wasn't. Saudi Arabia played the game of their entire international existence. They pressed insanely high. They finished every one of their few chances. They ran themselves into the ground in the second half and refused to concede. And 30 seconds after the final whistle, every Argentina fan on planet Earth was staring at a phone screen wondering if this was one more time going to be the tournament where it all fell apart. It wasn't. And in a way, it was almost the best thing that could have happened to that squad. Because after that game, Argentina did not lose again. Not once in the entire tournament. Mexico went down 2-0. Poland went down 2-0. Australia went down in the round of 16. And then they walked into the quarterfinal against the Netherlands, and Argentina delivered a match that has its own name now. The Battle of Lusail. Before kickoff, Louis van Gaal, the Netherlands manager, told the world he thought Messi could be neutralized because he wasn't very effective when the ball wasn't at his feet. He also said that if the match went to penalties, the Dutch were confident. Van Gaal is a legend of the game, and there is a version of those comments that reads as harmless pre-match theater. But the Argentine dressing room did not take them as theater. They took them personally, and the players said so afterwards. Argentina raced to 2-0. Then the Netherlands got 1 back late. Then the temperature of the match blew a fuse. In the 88th minute, Leandro Paredes fouled Nathan Ake and then absolutely launched the ball into the Dutch bench like a man aiming for a bullseye. The whole thing turned into a mass scuffle, benches emptied, tempers gone. And in the 10th minute of stoppage time, the Netherlands equalized. 2-2. Extra time. Penalties. Emiliano Martínez in goal. 2 saves. 2 absolute presidential saves. Argentina through. FIFA recorded the match with 18 yellow cards and 1 red card across the 120 minutes, a World Cup record. And after the whistle, Messi walked to a mid-pitch interview and yelled at Dutch striker Wout Weghorst on camera, which is honestly the most emotional you will ever see Lionel Andres Messi on a football pitch. That, more than the scoreline, tells you how heated it was. Croatia in the semi-final, the same Croatia that had reached the final in 2018. 3-0. Argentina were not asking questions anymore. They were sending statements. And then the final. France, defending champions. Kylian Mbappe, 23 years old, on a personal mission to score the goals that would make France the first back-to-back World Cup winners in 60 years. Mbappe scored a hat-trick in a World Cup final. Let me say that again because we breeze past it now that we know how it ended. Kylian Mbappe scored 3 goals in a single World Cup final, the first player to do that since 1966, and it wasn't enough. Argentina led 2-0. France came back to 2-2 in regulation. Argentina went 3-2 up in extra time. France came back to 3-3. Penalties. The greatest final almost anyone alive had ever seen, decided from 12 yards. Emiliano Martínez, the guy nobody trusted at 28, saved the day. Again, he stopped Kingsley Coman. He got inside Aurelien Tchouameni's head. And when Gonzalo Montiel finished the last kick, the trophy that Argentina had spent nearly 3 decades chasing was finally in the arms of the greatest number 10 the country ever produced. Messi lifted the World Cup. And in the same moment, for a very large portion of the global football public, a debate that had been running for 40 years quietly went to bed. Now the wild thing is, even after that, Argentina didn't stop. In 2024, the same core squad, with the same manager, with the same insufferable belief in themselves, went to the United States and won the Copa America on top of everything else. Back-to-back-to-back Continental Crown after World Cup. Only Spain, in the entire history of the sport, has ever won consecutive continental titles on both sides of a World Cup like that. That is the company Argentina joined. The jinx wasn't just cancelled. It was buried, salted, and paved over. And now, the only question left in the room is the one this video has been circling from the very first minute. Is this actually the start of a dynasty? Or is it the peak, right before the fall? So, is Argentina about to lead the sport for the next decade? Honestly, nobody knows. And that's not me dodging the answer. That's the actual answer. Because dynasties in this sport, by their nature, do not last long. Football is the least polite competition on earth. It punishes complacency faster than any other team sport that exists. Every single one of the great national team dynasties of the last 100 years came apart, one way or another, in almost identical fashion. Their stars aged out. Their federation blinked. A new generation showed up somewhere else, in some country nobody was watching, and rewrote the map before anyone knew it was happening. Brazil got theirs taken by Germany. Germany got theirs taken by Spain. Spain got theirs taken by France. France got theirs taken, at least for one afternoon, by Argentina. So the honest answer, if I had to bet, is that this Argentine side is closer to the end of the mountain than to the beginning of it. Messi is 38 years old now. Di Maria has retired from international duty. The core of this squad is entering the strangest window an aging champion team ever enters, where you're still capable of winning any single match on earth, but you're also one bad injury and one lost dressing room away from a very ugly transition. That's not doom-mongering. That's just how this sport works. But here's why I would not, if I were you, count Argentina out. If you've been paying attention to this video, really paying attention, you have already picked up the pattern. This country does not go quietly. This country has been counted out over and over again for over a century, and it has responded every single time in the exact same way. It has fallen. It has fought with itself. It has produced a generational talent nobody saw coming. It has rebuilt, usually from the least likely person in the room, and it has come back to the top of a trophy stand and looked around like nothing had happened. That was the argument this video was built on. The talent and the chaos. The civil war between what this country produces and what this country does to itself. Every time you think one side of that war has finally won for good, the other one shows up in the mirror. That is Argentina. That is why almost no team in the world can lift a trophy the way Argentina lifts a trophy. Because almost no team in the world has been through what Argentina had to go through to get there. So, is another 28-year drought coming? I would say very possibly no. And I would say the odds of it happening again the same way are pretty slim. Not zero. Never zero when Argentina is involved. But slim. That's the story. That's where we are. And now I want to hear from you. Do me one favor before you close this tab. Tap the like button on your way out. It genuinely helps this channel grow, and it's the single biggest reason videos like this end up in front of other fans who care about the story. While you're at it, hit subscribe and ring the bell because the next long-form deep dive on this channel is already in the pipeline. And if you like this one, you're going to want the notification the second it drops. And now the interesting part. I want 3 specific things from you in the comments. Not great video, not a thumbs up, actual takes. First one. If Argentina slips back into a drought after 2026, which of the current stars gets the unfair blame from history? Messi, Lautaro, or Scaloni himself? Pick one and defend it. Second, if you had to name the single true turning point of this dynasty, was it Scaloni's appointment, the Emiliano Martínez decision, the Maracanã final in 2021, or was it weirdly that 2-1 shock loss against Saudi Arabia that woke everything up? I want your pick, and I want the reason. Third one, which of the 7 lost finals between 1993 and 2021 hurts the most to you personally, even if you're not Argentine? For me, it's still that 2016 Copa, but I want to hear yours. Argentina spent 160 years turning talent and chaos into one of the most fascinating football cultures on earth. What comes next is going to be written in real time, and honestly, you're going to want to be here for it when it happens. Thanks for hanging in for the whole thing. Hope you enjoyed. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll catch you in the next one.